There are numbers you should never dial, voices you should never answer. But what if the phone rings and it calls you by name? If you're reading this, it might already be too late, because the dead remember who listens and they never forget who hangs. This is a story that's not just heard, it's felt, a whisper in the ear, a chill down your spine. Do not read this alone unless you're ready to answer the call. Asterisk. The farmhouse stood at the edge of nowhere, buried in rural silence, wrapped in ivy and forgotten storms. It had been empty for decades, but it didn't look abandoned. Not exactly. The porch sagged, but the windows were intact. The chimney was solid, and behind the heavy wooden door, the kitchen table had 4 chairs tucked in perfectly, like a family would be back any minute. Asterisk. Amber didn't believe in curses, she believed in inheritance. The house had been left to her after her grandmother passed, a sudden stroke that left questions unanswered and drawers full of unsent letters. Amber and her boyfriend, Isaac, drove down from Boston in her rust-red SUV engine, sputtering up the final gravel mile. Asterisk. Creepy, Isaac muttered as they stepped onto the porch. Amber smiled tightly. It's history. Asterisk. The key turned with a groan inside. The air was stale with the scent of mothball cedar and something faintly burnt. They wandered through the house in slow silence. Antique furniture, family photos, a grandfather clock that hadn't ticked in years, and the phone had sat in the study. On a polished oak desk, a rotary model, black, heavy, out of place, in a room filled with books about space and time. Amber touched it and felt a tiny static jolt. She laughed. Old wiring. Asterisk. Isaac didn't laugh. It's not plugged in. Asterisk. That night, as they unpacked, the phone rang. Once Amber froze. Did you hear? Asterisk. It's not possible, Isaac whispered. They crept into the study. The phone sat still, silent, unplugged. Then it rang again. Isaac picked it up. Nothing. Asterisk. He set it down and walked away. Amber stayed. Heart pounding, she picked up the receiver. A faint whisper crackled through the line. Don't hang up. She dropped the phone. Asterisk. That was the beginning. Asterisk. Asterisk. Amber didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house made her skin crawl. The walls felt like they were listening. Isaac tried to calm her, saying it was just leftover wiring, some residual charge, maybe even a prank. But they both knew better. The phone had no power cord, and no one else knew. They were there the next morning. They tried to move it. Isaac carried it out to the shed behind the house, placed it on a shelf, covered it with an old blanket, and locked the door. They left it there and said nothing more. That night it rang again, louder. Asterisk. This time it echoed through the entire house. Amber and Isaac stood frozen in the hallway, the sound dragging through their bones. Isaac grabbed a flashlight and ran to the shed, but when he got there, the door was still locked. The phone was still under the blanket, but it was vibrating, humming, with a sound that felt alive. He didn't touch it. He just backed away and locked the shed again, without a word. Asterisk. Amber found something later that day in one of her grandmother drawers. An envelope marked return. Inside was a yellowed page from a diary. The handwriting, sharp and rushed, it said, the phone isn't broken. It's remembering do not answer when it says your name. It lies. It remembers what it was told. Asterisk. Amber stared at the page. The words pulsed in her mind, memories of her grandmother's voice, sharp but kind, warning her as a child to never go near the study during storms, to never touch the black phone, to never answer if it rang. She had thought it was just a game. Now she wasn't sure. That night, the phone didn't ring. It whispered. Asterisk. Through the walls, through the vents, through the old radio that hadn't worked in years. Isaac smashed it with a hammer when it began repeating Amber's name again and again and again. Asterisk. Amber dreamed of the phone. It sat in a room with no windows and no walls, just endless ticking clocks, and a figure with no face whispering into the receiver, saying her name over and over. She woke with blood on her pillow, her nose bleeding, her ears ringing. The smell of burning wire filled the air. Asterisk. The shed was open. The phone was gone. Asterisk. They found it back on the desk in the study, exactly where it had first appeared. the dial turned itself, slowly to 209 asterisk, and then it stopped. Amber sat in the study, staring at the phone, afraid to touch it. The rotary dial pointed to 209, like it had locked itself into some forgotten moment. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her grandmother's old journal, the one she had only glanced through on the drive over. Now the pages felt heavier, like they were waiting to be read. She flipped through entries of recipes, shopping lists, names of people she didn't recognize, until she reached a page near the end. The handwriting was different, frantic, uneven, written in red ink, or maybe something darker. Asterisk. It started ringing again last night. It said she spoke to me. Again, she says. She's still trapped in the voice. Says it remembers the clocks won't stop. I tried to return it, but it always finds its way back. Asterisk. Amber's chest tightened. She turned the page. Asterisk. If you hear the ticking, it's already too late. She will come through any signal. She's no longer bound to wire. I broke the line, but she used the static. She used the thunder. She used me. Asterisk. Amber dropped the book, her hands trembling. Her grandmother hadn't gone senile. She had been warning her, protecting her, and no one had listened. Isaac came into the room, his face pale, his eyes darker than before. He said, "There's something I need to tell you. I didn't want to scare you." Asterisk. He handed her an old Polaroid photo. It showed the study, the same desk, the same phone, but in the picture someone was sitting behind it, a woman with a stitched mouth and empty eyes. The picture had no date, no caption, but the edges were burned. Asterisk. I found this in the basement. Isaac said there are more photos, hundreds of them, all of this room, all at the same time, every one with that same woman. She moves closer in each picture. Amber couldn't speak. That night, they locked the study door and pushed a dresser in front of it. But it didn't help. The phone rang all night long. Sometimes it echoed from the attic. Sometimes it vibrated from the walls. Sometimes it rang from the floorboards, but always at the same time. 209 asterisk. Amber opened the diary again. On the last page was a single line, scrawled sideways across the bottom. Asterisk. You can record her, but you cannot erase her. She's made of memory, now, and memory does not die. Asterisk. Asterisk. The next morning, Amber sat alone at the kitchen table. The phone was silent, for now the house felt different, colder somehow, as if something had shifted beneath the floorboards. She had been trying to convince herself this was all psychological, that maybe the stress of the inheritance and isolation were pushing her too far, but deep down she knew better. The phone was not just haunted, it was alive, and whatever was inside, it had been waiting. Asterisk. She turned back to the journal, flipping to the back cover where a folded map had been hidden, taped to the inside, a hand-drawn floor plan of a building with one room, circled in red, room 209. Her grandmother had never mentioned anything about a second property, but Amber recognized the name in the margin, written in small, faint letters. St. Callahan Sanatorium. Asterisk. Isaac didn't want to go, but Amber insisted the sanatorium had closed in the 70s, but was still standing 40 minutes from the farmhouse, a broken skeleton of stone, and sorrow wrapped in vines and silence. They drove in silence, the sky a dull gray, as if the weather knew where they were headed. Asterisk. The building loomed like a forgotten castle. The windows were all smashed, the doors wide open like a mouth that had forgotten how to close. They stepped inside, the smell of mildew and rust, almost unbearable. Amber held the journal in her hand, flipping between pages as they walked, following the path toward the second-floor corridor at the end of a long hallway. Where mold crept up the walls, they found it room 209. The door was sealed with chains, rusted and tight. Someone had painted symbols across the wood with something dark and sticky. Isaac said we shouldn't open it. Amber said we have to. She began cutting the chains with bolt cutters she had borrowed from the shed. Every snap echoed through the corridor until the last chain fell and the door creaked open. Asterisk. Inside was a single chair facing a mirror, the walls covered in hundreds of taped pages, torn from different books, journals, and newspapers. all scribbled over in red ink with one repeated phrase she remembers. The clocks do not forgive. She remembers the clocks do not forgive asterisk. In the center of the room sat a recorder not plugged in, not powered, just sitting there, waiting next to it. A small torn note, written in the same hand as the diary. You cannot erase her. You can only pass her on record the voice. But never press play asterisk. Isaac picked up the recorder and stared at it for a long time and then slowly pressed record asterisk. The recorder clicked into motion without hesitation. No wires, no batteries. Just the sound of tape spooling inside Isaac's hands trembled as he held it to his chest. Amber stood back, not breathing the air inside. Room 209 had thickened like smoke pressing. Against their skin, something unseen moved in the corner, a shimmer like breath on glass, and then the voice began asterisk. It was not a scream, not a whisper, but something in between a woman's voice layered with static, speaking in circles. Time devours memory, memory fuels time, return, 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 asterisk. The recorder stopped by itself. Isaac stared down at it, eyes wide. I didn't press anything. Amber stepped forward and picked up the torn note. Again her fingers brushed against the mirror beside the chair. The surface rippled like water, but left no mark asterisk. They left the room without speaking, carrying the recorder back to the farmhouse. The wind outside had changed, direction whispering through the trees like distant ticking clocks. And as they pulled into the driveway, they saw it. The phone had moved it now, sat outside on the front steps, perfectly centered and ringing. Asterisk. Isaac refused to touch it. He walked inside, shut the door, and started flipping through the photos again, trying to understand the timeline of the woman with the stitched mouth. Amber brought the recorder into the study and placed it next to the phone. The journal said to never play it, but it said nothing about proximity asterisk that night. They heard the ticking again, not just from the clock in the hallway, but from behind the walls, inside the pipes under the bed. Isaac whispered, "It's counting us down." Amber whispered, "It's counting us back asterisk." In her dreams, Amber saw a man dressed in soot-covered overalls working in a room filled with clocks, his fingers stained with oil and something darker. He spoke aloud without looking up. "She paid me in seconds. I owe her in years. The clocks are not broken. They're angry asterisk." When she woke, she found a gear in her bed. Small, old, and rusted. The teeth were chipped and still wet with something red. Isaac found one too lodged inside his pillow. They didn't speak about it. They just sat at the kitchen table as the phone began to ring again. Every minute louder, every minute closer asterisk. Amber opened the journal to the entry titled, "The Clockmaker's Debt." It was written in a different ink and tone. It spoke of an old man who built a machine that could trap time, not freeze it, but bend it, enough to hold her inside a loop of whispers and hours. But when he died, the machine failed, and she slipped through the minute that doesn't exist asterisk. She now moves in static, in tick and pulse. If she knows your voice, she will count you back to her. And when you arrive, there will be no more hours, only echo asterisk. Amber looked at the phone and for the first time asked a question out loud. How do you stop something that lives in remembering? The phone did not ring that hour, but the recorder started playing by itself asterisk. The recorder hissed for a long moment before sound poured out, not music, not speech, but layered tones, a clock chime, reversed, distant breathing, the scrape of nails. Across wood beneath it all, a faint female voice counting backward. Amber and Isaac stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The sound filled the room like fog, and then it stopped asterisk. They rewound the tape without pressing anything. The recorder clicked back on and began playing again. Exactly the same as before, same sound, same voice, same sequence. Amber realized it wasn't a recording. It was a doorway asterisk. The phone rang as soon as the tape ended, but not just from the study. They heard the ring echoing from every room, even the ones they had never opened before, closets, the attic, the basement behind mirrors. Every wall vibrated with the same tone. Isaac grabbed the recorder and threw it out the front door into the mud. The phone stopped ringing instantly. The house fell silent again. They didn't sleep the next morning. Amber stepped out to find the recorder back on the porch, completely clean dry, resting beside the phone. Isaac began checking every clock in the house, one by one. He said they're all wrong. They all skip over a single minute. 2:09 to 2. 11 no clock in the house shows 2:10. Even the microwave. Even the battery-operated ones. Even my wristwatch. He held it up for her to see. The hands jumped every hour 2 minutes. Not one asterisk. Amber flipped through the journal again, looking for something. Anything that explained this, and then she found a pressed note hidden between the tween pages asterisk. There is a minute that doesn't exist if you stay awake long enough. You can hear it. If you speak during it, she will find you. That's when she calls. When the line is clear, that's when the clocks are listening asterisk. She and Isaac began taking shifts, one awake. While the other dozed, they counted seconds, watched the clocks, marked every moment on the walls, but every night they missed it no matter what they tried. They could not stay awake for 2:10 until Isaac did. He burst into the kitchen, pale sweat pouring from his skin, shaking uncontrollably. I saw her, he whispered. She came through the phone. No, not through it, around it, like it was. Just a speaker. She walked backward, her feet never touching the ground, and she whispered your name asterisk Amber. Didn't ask what else he saw. She could already feel her ears ringing again, like the sound was returning inside her skull. She checked the clocks. They had begun spinning backward. Not fast, not chaotic, but steady, smooth. Unbreaking. The world was counting back asterisk. The phone had no dial tone. Now only silence, and under that silence, ticking, always ticking. And behind that, a breath waiting to speak asterisk asterisk. Amber unplugged everything in the house. The radio, the lights, the microwave, even the thermostat. But the ticking did not stop. It came from inside the walls. Now, not like a heartbeat, but like a countdown. Counting back to something they could not name. She sat on the floor with the recorder in her lap, watching the tape spin. Even when it wasn't turned on, it still moved forward like time. But the sound came. Backward whispers, voices, memories that were not hers asterisk. Isaac stood by the window, watching the trees sway without wind. The sky outside had gone an unnatural shade of gray, like a photo, faded in the sun. Something in the air tasted metallic, like old pennies and smoke. He whispered, do you feel like something is listening from beneath? US, not above, not around, but under, like we're standing on a mouth that's about to speak. Asterisk. The phone rang again, once, twice, 3 times. But this time it was different. Each ring made the room colder. The shadows deeper with every chime. The house seemed to shift slightly, as if its foundation was loosening. Amber picked it up without meaning. To the receiver was ice against her ear, and the voice came clear and slow. Asterisk, you remember me. I remember you. You turned the tape. You called the time. You are the hour that was lost asterisk. She tried to hang up, but her hand would not move. Her fingers locked in place. Isaac grabbed the phone and yanked it from her hand, but the line stayed connected, dangling mid-air. The voice still speaking, now faster, repeating. Return, 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 return asterisk. He smashed the phone with a hammer. It shattered into black plastic and tangled wires, but the receiver stayed whole, untouched, lying in the middle of the floor. Humming softly, Amber whispered, she's not inside the phone. She's using it. She's something else asterisk. That night, the air in the house changed again, heavy with static. Even when they walked, their feet dragged as if the floor resisted movement. Light bulbs burst one by one. Clocks melted, not from heat, but from confusion. Their hands spinning in opposite directions asterisk. They found a second tape, hidden behind a drawer, labeled Last Signal. Amber loaded it into the recorder, and as soon as it played, the windows in the house fogged, the mirrors cracked, and the voice began speaking in perfect reverse. Not garbled, not chaotic, but precise. Isaac recorded it on his phone and reversed the playback. The message was clear asterisk. She was not the first. She was the loudest. She does not need wires now. She moves through sound, through memory, through belief asterisk. Amber stared at the journal again. The last few pages were blank, but soaked in some kind of oily stain, and when held to the light, faint writing appeared, etched like scars. Asterisk. When you break the signal, you break the seal. When you break the seal, you let her in. When you let her in, she remembers her. Way out. Asterisk. Isaac said we're not in a house, we're in a story, and she's rewriting us. Amber nodded, her hands trembling. The clocks all struck 2:09. Again, but this time the tape recorder clicked on by itself and began to rewind. Not just the tape, but the air around them. The shadows flowed backward, and the lights flickered like memories being undone. Asterisk. Outside, a radio antenna that had never been there before now stood in the yard, taller than the trees, humming, alive, pulsing with every breath of the wind. Asterisk. Asterisk. Amber stared out the window at the towering antenna rising from the ground, like it had grown overnight, pulsing in sync with the whisper of the wind. It wasn't metal, not exactly. It looked like bone wrapped in wire. Each movement of the trees around it caused the signal to fluctuate. The house vibrated with every pulse, as if responding in kind. Asterisk. Isaac placed a hand on the nearest wall and whispered, "It's breathing." The wood beneath his fingers expanded and contracted ever so slightly, not like settling or wind, but like lungs. Taking in stale time, the wallpaper peeled away in thin strips, revealing symbols drawn beneath, ancient and familiar, like the same markings that were painted on room 209. Asterisk. Amber walked through the hallway, each step echoing like she was inside a tunnel that stretched for miles. Photographs on the wall now showed images she had never taken. Her childhood bedroom with a rotary phone on the floor, a hospital corridor with the door open and light spilling out, her face reflected in the mirror, but not from this moment, from something before. Asterisk. She called out for Isaac, but the walls swallowed her voice. The house no longer echoed in return. It spoke in fragments, each floorboard a syllable, each creak a word beneath her feet. The sounds rearranged themselves until she could almost hear the message. You brought her back. The clock struck 2:09 again, and every mirror in the house turned black, then clear, then black again. Images flickered on them, not reflections, but moments from elsewhere. Strangers holding phones, screaming alone in rooms that looked like hers, always the same expression of horror as the signal overtook them. Asterisk. Isaac shouted from the kitchen. Amber ran toward him, but the hallway kept stretching, elongating, until the door moved farther with each step. She stopped, turned around, and found herself at the staircase. Again she screamed, and the stairs folded inward, leading her down into the basement, even though she had not taken a step. Asterisk. In the darkness, a light flickered, and she saw him. Isaac standing still, eyes wide, pupils gone, his mouth open as if listening to something, not with ears, but with memory. The recorder was at his feet, spinning and playing no sound, but the air around it was thick with something that glowed like static. Asterisk. Amber tried to grab him, but her hands passed through like mist. He looked right at her and whispered, "She's rewriting me in real time. I said her name, I didn't mean to. I answered before the ring." Asterisk. The phone rang again, but this time it wasn't coming from upstairs or the desk. It rang from the walls, from inside the foundation, from under the floorboards, and Amber felt it press against her ribs, from the inside out, the ring vibrating her bones like she was becoming a speaker for something older than language. Asterisk. She covered her ears, but still heard the voice say, "You know the sound, you remember the silence. The minute is yours, now speak it aloud and let me back in." Asterisk. Amber fell to her knees. The house above her shifted, the antenna outside struck lightning that made no sound, and all around her the rooms began to collapse inward, not with force, but with memory erasing themselves, one by one, like forgotten dreams. Asterisk. Then she heard it again, a soft whisper, not from the phone, but from the space between seconds. Asterisk. Don't let her speak. Amber stumbled through the collapsing hallway, where walls bled shadow and floors. Remembered footsteps she had never taken. The phone rang again, but now it didn't sound like a phone. It sounded like a heartbeat stitched to a siren calling from inside her skull. The house was no longer just wood and wire. It had become a living signal, a body of rooms, pulsing with memory and grief. Isaac was gone or rewritten. The version she found in the dining room was whispering in reverse, his hands twitching in a rhythm that matched the ticking clocks, his face blurred like a forgotten name. She touched his arm, and he shattered into echoes, each fragment repeating her name in a different tone, some pleading, some warning, some already gone. The recorder lay on the table, still spinning even though the tape had unraveled across the floor. It wasn't playing anything yet. The house responded to its movement. Every turn of the spool made the ceiling flicker, the walls ripple, as if reality itself was hanging by magnetic thread. Amber opened the front door, hoping for air, but the world outside had vanished. The trees were gone, the sky replaced with static. A sea of televisions floating in the distance, each screen showing her standing at the phone, holding the receiver, her face cracked by fear, each version blinking out one by one. She turned and the phone was in her hand, already ringing. The dial had no numbers anymore, only letters etched deep in blackened plastic spelling. Remember. She placed it on the table and opened the final page of her grandmother's journal. Only one sentence remained written in shaking lines. The last ring is not for you. It is for her, and she will answer with your voice. Amber closed the journal and stared at the recorder, then the phone, then the antenna, now pressing against the clouds above the house, each pulse louder, each chime clearer, like a countdown, not to something starting, but something returning. She lit a match and dropped it on the tape, but the fire went out before it reached the reel. The tape hissed and rewound by itself, and in the silence after the click, the phone rang one last time. 209. She answered. This time she didn't hear a voice. She heard herself crying, laughing, begging from somewhere she hadn't yet been. The floor melted beneath her feet, and the house folded around her like paper, every room pressed flat, every clock silenced except one ticking inside her chest. She fell through the floor, not down, but in, and landed inside the sanatorium room. 209. The chair, the mirror, the words scrawled in every corner. Her reflection stared. Back mouth, sewn shut eyes, wide open hands, gripping a phone that never stopped ringing. In her ears, the final whisper came from the recorder, now cracked and still. You are the ring now. The house no longer stood where Amber once arrived, no longer had rooms or doors or clocks. It had become something else, a broadcast made from wood and bone, powered by the memory of every person who had ever answered the phone. Amber was part of it, now not a ghost, not a victim, not even a memory. She was the voice that called out across wires and static, her words hidden in ringing tones and ticking silence and forgotten numbers. Whispered at 209. Back in Boston, a boy named Elijah found an old phone in his grandmother's attic, dusty and heavy, tucked behind boxes and faded coats. He brought it downstairs, plugged it in just to see if it worked. It rang before his hand touched the dial, and when he answered, he heard nothing at first, just a hum like breath beneath a floorboard, and then a voice soft and low like someone trying not to cry. Do you remember the minute? Elijah hung up, but the phone rang again, and again, each ring louder, more urgent, more familiar. He asked his grandmother who the phone belonged to, but she shook her head, said no one had used that line in years, said it should not even work anymore. He tried to throw it away, but it showed up on his desk the next day, still clean, still ringing. Across the country in a radio station, an engineer heard interference on every broadcast, whispers that couldn't be filtered, voices that mimicked the host's words seconds before they spoke in a hospital. An old nurse heard the intercom call her name, even though no one had touched the switch. And when she answered it, she cried without knowing why, her hands shaking. her heart counting down 209, the minute that doesn't exist, had begun spreading not through one house, but through stories shared. Retold remembered the tape did not need to play anymore. The story itself had become the signal. The voice had no need for wires. It traveled through fear and belief through screens. And sound and silence, Amber's face began appearing in old photographs of strangers, her voice. Layered beneath lullabies played backward, her reflection seen in mirrors, not yet cracked. She had become the call that waits. Back at the sanatorium, room 209 remains sealed, but the mirror in that room shows two reflections, one standing still, one watching. And when you look long enough, they become the same. The mirror hums if you stand near it at night, and sometimes the chair turns by itself just slightly, as if someone has stood and left the room asterisk. But the room is always empty, and the phone still rings. The story is now complete. The signal spreads no longer trapped in a house or a phone, but reborn through stories shared through memory, through belief, through you asterisk. If you made it this far, then the minute already knows your name. You read the story, you heard the ring, and now it's your turn to pass it on. Share this with someone who won't answer the call, because if they do, they might not come back asterisk.